So which way down the rabbit hole do we go? Well, we don't really have a time date with these things, so we might as well go back to the tried and true where square is just fucking killing it over here. On the index of the board, hell, at least if anything I can tell from the conversation, tweet to tweet, there's an output on A to F of what you do.
I need my online degree
and
to mean
A
something.
being Z,
With WGU, it
F
does.
being Z prime.
An accredited
in the
university
elevator
with
here.
degree
Tells
programs
me about what
employers
floor
respect.
you need to go through
I choose
given
WGU.
which gambit. I guess I'm just gonna use gambit arbitrarily.
Trust my spirit, intuition,
Sure. Why the hell
gut feeling
not?
and
Just
suspicion.
be
I am on a
congruent,
mission. Reading
and
books for ammunition.
NRA.
Mind unlocked and loaded, potent, explosive.
And do different
I can be
combinations of
what I
those
want to
things,
be,
fill off that
and
matrix
then I set
arbitrarily.
myself free.
But somebody
I've
else says
always
this
known
is
that
what
I
that
hold
is.
the keys,
Alright,
but
in this
when the penny drops
classroom,
and
do you
set my
want it to
mind
be
at
that
ease,
too?
tell me what
Yeah,
you
we
know,
want that to
wanna
be
know
that too.
it
Then it's
all.
fucking
In the
be in
country,
here
warriors
inside of that.
make
You stay on my
it
goddamn
all.
leisure or
Just
what it
power
is.
every call me.
You can make a
Singing
vote on it.
I'm taking notes.
Can also be that. A can be R can be A.
All right, we start a
N
brave new
is a
world.
set.
So we're done with our series inner sequences. Now we're gonna omit one section of here and start with the good stuff. The good stuff that we're gonna talk about for the rest of our section and for kind of most of the rest of this chapter is parametric equations, the calculus of parametric equations, polar
Parametrics.
coordinates, and the
So a
calculus
metric
of polar coordinates.
is a given set. That's a given. But a parametric to that is to say there are within this. In the stone mill, I say you can walk in.
So we start
Some of
something
you are
new
managers,
in
some of
plane
you are
curve
laborers,
parametric equations
some of you are
because
customers.
Sometimes
As an employee,
it's really
you are a
hard
customer, and
or
that whole
impossible
thing
to
has a
define
parallel
function
matrix to
or
a
curve
parametric.
as a function. And so we have
And
a
it gives
different way
me
to
a
do that.
function
So
inside of
I'm
there
gonna-
of
like I
saying
just
an
said, I'm gonna be
employee,
writing a lot
you're
about
buying
a lot
into
of
the
those
stock of the
this is
company or
probably
something. This is
brand new
pretty
to
heavy.
all of you unless you had the class before.
The equation
So,
on that is a form. Is a
first
very
thing-
specific form. I'm not care
First
which.
thing I
I
gotta do
don't
is
care
define
what it
plane
is.
curve is.
I'm gonna go
Plane, not
by
the big-
Google
plane
or
curves
using
around.
YouTube
Plane curve we're
is
talking about, okay.
a plane
Talk
curve.
about
A
curve
parametric
on an actual
equation
plane. So
to
not
this
a three-dimensional curve, a
is
two-dimensional
valued
curve,
in that
just
system, and I'm
somewhere
just
on a
going for
flat
prime.
surface. Does that make
This
sense
already
to you?
does
A
the arbitrary
three-dimensional
work for
curve
me.
would be
I'm
like
just
a
going to
curve in
use it.
free space.
Don't think too
That
much
would
about
be
this,
your
about
next
the
semester
complicated
topic.
nature
So
of it. We're going to get
here,
into the
what a plane curve means, it's just the motion
compression.
of an object on a plane. That's really all it is. So
The
when you see
compression
this
in
word
it
plane,
negatives
what's that
it
mean?
mathematically
Well,
because
what
it's still
this
in
is
forward motion. But that compression gives me pressure. Pressure gives me a point. Point gives me a value of trajectory in those systems. See, they're all parametrics or parallel planes in one form. And that one form is valued into, well, to be fair, field theory equation. But we got to put Einstein down. We can't. Nobody's here. He's dead. It doesn't work. I said about Bernoulli the
I'm
other
going
day.
to list out for you. I'm actually going to write these out so you have some good notes here. There's a problem with always defining a plane curve in terms of x and y, rectangular coordinates. So there's a few problems with this.
The problem, firstly, is this location is already squared away. I'll know it's in another college. However, I don't know when it'll come up. And that's an NP problem. It's a parallel to that problem. It's a parallel matrix.
So the motion of an object in a plane.
You'll
so we're
notice that
talking
all
about
the
here.
grids work the same. They all look the same. Some power of 3 or whatever works for
Like
you.
a normal function.
1, 2. Being a break has 2 parts inside of it, which
And
is
what I mean by
10
that
2.
is like a
Still has
function
everything
in
to do with the
terms of
first
x and
set
y.
and the second order, or this phase having
That's
2
typically
parts
what
to
we
it.
do, right? We look at a
Tomorrow.
curve and we say, okay, this curve
It won't
is
be
on
this.
an
This is already
XY
done.
coordinate system. It's on a plane. And for any plane, we should be able to go, okay, here's your y, here's your x.
The
We should be able
snowflake.
to define the motion of that curve with x's and y's.
Later
correct?
that goes,
It's at this
what,
point, and it's at
I,
this point, and
or
it's on
1
a plane.
I,
It should
2
always be on
I,
an XY coordinate system.
J,
So
negative
why is there
1,
some
yeah, but you'd
problems
fix
on
it.
defining a
X, Y,
plane curve like a
1x,
normal function
2x.
with x's and y's? Well, we're still going to have x's and y's, but the way we describe them, sometimes we have a problem because those curves, they're not always functions.
Scale.
So one problem we run into with plane curves is that many
Well,
times, so here's the problems with defining a plane curve.
It
like
does
a
work on the
normal
macro
function.
when I'm
Problem
looking at the
one,
person, but let's say we got 12
Well, that's
stables
not
going
functions.
off at the same time in the stone mill. The output's not going to be virtued onto those systems, and each might have compelling reasons why
many times
I only had 2 skid steers but 4 bays.
they are not functions.
You know, I have 4 bays running on 3 different order sets. It's not like we're all making trends, but it all correlates to dollar bills.
As a function. You can't say the
Or
function
time.
y in terms of x
You don't like
because it's not a
all
function.
correlates to
That's
time.
an issue. There's a couple other problems. Second one, a lot of times these curves,
Well, it's about love and
even
sexual
if they
fundamental
are
value.
functions, or if they're not functions, they can't be explicitly defined in terms of one variable. Like think
It's
of a
a
circle.
AU.
Is a circle
It's
a
a
function?
derivative of U, which is
And the
gold.
equation
It's the
for a circle
golden
is x
ratio
squared
by a
plus
different
y squared
standard.
equals r
People
squared.
get a little sketchy about
Can you
it.
describe that
People,
in terms of one
they,
variable?
well, firstly, the
Well, you can. You
Bible
can take a square
kind
root
of
of plus or
undersold
minus,
that.
but you can't
And in the
explicitly do
church,
and
that
still
would have
have a
been
function. You can
something
describe
that
it
they
and it
don't
will make that
necessarily
circle
work.
the plus
Remember,
and minus, but it's really
the
hard to
church
do. That's
isn't the
awkward.
business
Some
down the
of them you
road.
can't do
It's
it at all.
not
So that one
the
you
sheep
can't define
farm. It's
explicitly.
not
Won't make
this, that, or
function
the
out,
other.
so don't
Because
have that
otherwise
considered.
everybody's working
Some
on
of
the
them you
sheep
can't
farm.
even
Because
do it.
everybody's
So
in church.
the second problem we run into
And,
is,
well,
firstly,
the devil is
some of
hard
our
as shit
functions,
to
a lot of
explain.
our
Derivative
functions,
L over
actually,
derivative
even if
T.
they are
When and
primitive
where,
enough,
how,
a lot
why.
of them cannot
It's
be
what we use.
explicitly
Leonard
defined
is hard to
in one
describe when you'll come up in the stone mill. Lambda. Wave function on a black
variable. So
body.
MIDI, we cannot
If you started to do it and it was in this form,
explicitly
not
define.
this form, but you were doing it in a teaching model, your numbers of electromagnetisms on the stone mill floor to the processes you teach would go skyrocket. And, well, that can be on the ear if you're doing it correctly. It depends on how well you... I don't want to be fair. I want to be fair. It's... Depending on how well you teach it, would have been that student. Now, often I'll hear them say something in this class like, oh, that was supposed to be a negative. You would get a lot less... you would get a lot less of the negative,
Just a curve of points. If a plane curve
which can be a problem if you're only focused on the positive. So I need that one negative over the odds because it's going to set me out like an F student inside here. The term is a force. Now, I would just be explaining it out rigorously like that, but it's like you've done nothing at all. If you've done nothing at all, the energy transmission while you're thinking about it may not be relative. Oh, we're dealing with a whole bunch of stuff of...
But if I miss it, it's going to walk a little bit, right? I really hate mosquitoes.
Well,
so if you see me just,
to be fair, I'd assume that he's chasing something, and students are off the game leisure.
The board is a plane.
So it makes it easier to computate the y function into z as xy.
Probably not.
I could do it for anything instead of just the relative functions of closing the gap.
Respect mathematics is darn
You do
bug.
things like training some other brother that system inside this classroom, outside of this classroom.
This curve with x's and y's. Yes, you say here.
You would be
here.
factoring
But
it
if you
here.
try to
The
do it
number
with
actually
only a
correlated
normal
some
function,
reality
it's really
under
hard to
there.
get versus
To,
cut function.
if you can't pass this class, and
and
she's got a better grade than you, then you're going to come up stupid on the system, and that makes fundamental breeding a lot harder.
So if I just list out this,
Or functional
do you
breeding,
know,
excuse
without me
me.
telling you, do you know where the bug started? Do you know the direction that it traveled? Do you know where it was at any
Terminal
given
velocity.
time?
Ball in air,
No,
ball in water,
that's another
ball in
problem
floor,
here. So, firstly,
hydromodium.
they're not functions. Secondly,
It's like,
a lot of times you
she
can't
is,
explicitly
you
define
are,
them
this
as one
is,
variable,
you're
and
all...
they don't
Well, it could be an
tell where the
alcohol
object
solution
is
if
at a
you'd
given
like to try
time.
that one in this class. It would graph. How many of you can handle it by a series of being drunk, and therefore, now that I've exposed all that information to you, who trusts who when they've been drinking for DD? Does it make a difference? Somebody's arguing with whether this should do that on the other thing. Well, those arguments aren't going to help things.
I'm going to use time loosely here.
I'm pretty rigorous about it. About it. There.
Whatever. We use the word time because parametric equations, I'm going to say this in a little bit, are kind of thought of in terms of time.
Well,
Talk about that.
it's...
And
Remember how I
lastly,
said it's
I
like you've
just
done
mentioned
nothing
this.
at all? Time
If
being...
you're talking about an object,
loose
it's,
here.
Traveling, it's very useful to know where it started, sure, when it was at a given point, where it ended, and the direction that it's taking.
You have to be able
if I
to
just give you a
give an
line,
answer to that.
doesn't
If
give you a
I just
direction.
sit you here doing nothing,
That's a
I'm
problem.
gonna
In
get
fact,
so
a
far
lot
ahead
of
of you.
times
And this
we
is his
use
class. He
curves,
should
use
because he has it in
You
hand.
just go away.
He knows the capstone.
Both directions? How
I
can
just
that happen?
trying to
Where's
figure it
start?
out
Where's
what
stop?
he's
I don't
explaining
know.
it to
It's
me.
just a series of points. This has an indication that just goes forever. Well, it doesn't tell you where it starts. Doesn't tell you where
It's
it
hard
stops.
without the
does it?
homework assignments. A
That's,
lot
that's
of
an issue. If we're mapping where an object is going, we need that. We need where it's starting, where it's stopping, and how it's traveling. So this one gives us
they're
no
testing here.
direction.
Oh,
So
that
no
was
direction was given.
the other one there. That was compression test. This is a hot and cold phase. This is high and low. Excuse me.
For that reason,
Electrical
we create
engineers.
what are called parametric equations. Parametric equations are the way that you deal with plane curves. So this is not really two different concepts. This
So
is
remember
the
how
way
I
that
said
we
you
are
get an
going to
LED out?
tackle
Is there a computer
this.
and
Does that make
electrical
sense to
engineer in the room?
So
So
the
I
way
want
that
to
we are
use
going
him,
to go
honey,
about
brother,
mapping these
anybody
plane
who
curves
doesn't
is with
understand electrical
parametric
engineering,
equations. So let's talk
even
about
though I
it.
don't
I'll
understand
give
it
you,
fundamentally as
give you
somebody
the
in the
idea
class,
behind parametric
I would say
Have
get the
actually
LED
been
out,
through, you see the
get
bulbs
the
I'm trying
capacitor, the
to show
wire,
you
and the
here.
battery.
They're pretty common sense if you understand
But
the,
in
what
that
the
set,
object is doing when it's
in
moving.
that variable
Wanna know
in
where
there,
it
the
starts, where it
LED's
ends,
got to
you
go
wanna know
off
where it ends,
because
you wanna know when
that's
or where
the
it is
only
at
way
any
it
given
went through
time.
there. It might come
And
up
you
in
wanna
other
know the direction
sections.
it's
I could put
So
the wire
that's why
here,
we're
here,
using
here, here, here,
parametric
here, and the
So,
wire and the blinkety light
parametric
still goes up.
equations.
But that length of the wire increases on the approximation at the Z level of this system. Now, it might not be enough in the approximation to noticeably drain the battery or weaken the
Here's what a
photon and the...
parametric equation does. It says, you know what, if you're,
Now
if
look at
you're
the
in a
classroom.
plane, you can
How many
be
of you
described by
would
X's
shake
and
your head
Y's.
yes to
For
that
sure
right now?
you
As an
can. You can say,
example,
at this point,
between
you're
X and Y of
and
describing
Y.
a
That's how planes work. That's why we have a
parametric
rotating
equation.
coordinate system to map any point on a plane.
42 would be
No
right over
problem.
there in the form
It's
of
just the way we
electron.
define
E.
it changes a little bit. We say, okay, if we want to describe
Psychology
where
also
X
works
is
that
and
way
where
if
Y
I
is,
design
we can
that
actually do
breadboard
it
to have highs and
differently than
lows.
describing
1,
Y as a
0,
function of X,
well, yeah,
or X
1,
as a function of Y.
0,
What we do
1,
instead is say, tell you what,
2, negative
instead of
1,
having
negative
X as a
2.
function of Y,
So in the classroom, if I ask certain
and Y as a
questions and I
function of
got
X, we're gonna have
this
X and
or
Y
this
as a
or
function of a
this,
different variable,
they
an
would be
independent
hot and
variable,
cold to an
time, or
LED
t. So
photon
that's where we
emission.
get this parameter.
Para-
The t's called a
parametric
parameter. We say,
equations.
okay, tell you what, you can actually describe X
You need to fix the
as a
expression on your face right now because I can
and
tell what you're
Y
thinking.
as a function.
And if I knew what that was,
Some
I could
other
get in front of
variable.
it. T.
It's still gonna
Gravity
give you,
under those Y values
an
would
X and
be.
Y,
You're going to be
depending on what you
somewheres
plug
in
for
there.
your
You're
time. But
definitely
in this way,
diverging on that
get away
system.
from this,
And if I was
well,
right,
if
even
they're
if
not functions
you're calling it
of
something
each
wrong
other,
or different,
no
it's
problem.
right. You're right.
You
I
can
wasn't.
define X as
I
a
was
function
using
of
a
time and Y as a function of time. Say,
parametric
hey,
equation to what
at
that
any
was
given time,
because
you'll have
you
X
thought
and
it was
Y
what it was
coordinates
there,
that makes
and
sense.
that thing was just going
So
to
if it's at
FMA
1
you
second,
across
you
the
can
finish
plug in
line.
1 and 1. It's going to give you X
It
and Y.
won't. You
That's
need
gonna tell you where
multiple
that point is
variables
and
that indicate
when
that
point
system.
was there. Does that make sense
Chemistry,
to you?
electrical
It will a little
engineering,
bit. I
it
promise
will.
it will.
That I'll give
So,
him its fair
we define
inside
the
here
motion of
about.
both the motion in both
You
the X
need to
and Y
know
directions
there's not enough time
of
in
some
here.
variable
It's like I'm gonna hit
So,
all of those things,
I'll
and
write
remember
that
how
out so
fast
you can-
chemistry, physics, engineering. It
So we're going
sounded
to
good,
define-
sounded real good, but without a comprehensive form on compositions
Motion.
and gold-plated pins
In both
on electrical
X and Y
engineering
directions.
on Mercury or on Venus. You know, it would be too hot. It'd be too hot for those kinds of compositions to work, so it wouldn't work. But that's the plasticity and deformation and physics of another curvature, of another, what do you got here?
as a function of some
Variable.
T.
There you go. Then the index between A or X and Y, the FT would be Earth on our standard, but the
And
gravity
it's
would
an
still
independent
apply
variable.
in
X and Y become
Mercury,
independent variables
Venus,
of Mars.
Mars, so Alpha Centauri. Lensing on any problem could also mean topology differentials. If it was underwater and high salt composition led to higher oxidation states of the copper
Over a
wire,
common domain.
plasticity, shear force, time dilation, how long on the service ratings to those things that really correlate to
And we call that domain
keeping track
I.
of these numbers. And it's like these actually become forms, parametric equations. This I would do
Now,
the
here's
stone
some words we're
mill
gonna be
right
using,
next door
okay?
to it
You
because
want me
it's
to go
what's
through one
practical
time,
to
like
me.
a 10-second recap?
My business.
Okay.
So
here we go.
any form I would do to this
Our
is
problems with plane
parametric
curves,
to this.
Problems are real fast. A lot of times they ain't functions.
Real fast.
All the time, a plane curve, if you define it as x and y's, it will not tell you where it starts, won't tell you where it stops, will not give you direction. Okie dokie. And a lot of times you can't expressly or explicitly define it in terms of one variable. That makes it difficult for us. So we get around that by saying, tell you what, yeah, every point's still going to have an x and y. Obviously, it's going to be on a plane. It's going to have an x and y. Let's just describe
gotta
it
be on a
differently.
plane.
Let's say that, well, x is
Well,
now
there's a
described by a
bit-
function of time, function of t, whatever t
As the
happens to be,
college that's
and y is
involved with this,
described
if
by a
you
function
want
of t,
them
the same
to
variable, but
agree
maybe
with
a
what
different
your
way to
math is
describe them.
inside
So
here,
it says,
this
hey,
form is just a
maybe
bunch of
the
writing.
function of
fair enough. But you gotta
T
give it
for
the
X
zero on
says
this.
in
You
one
gotta
case,
give
at
it
1
the
second, you
gravitational
go
bound
over
to it,
3.
otherwise your
And
material
at
won't
1
work,
second,
or
you
him
go
as a
up
teacher won't work
5.
either.
Would it give you a point?
regardless of how much it does. You keep failing my test, you're not giving any graphing values, and you want to consider that a new parametrics in mathematics or some value. Well, you're right, but it's not pure enough. You gave it to two-phase onside here, which is your business, which is a great thesis, but you got to be able to correlate this to and it's a challenge. I need, after all this is done, to then just arbitrarily make my system work to it.
If we start at t equals 1 and end at t equals 5,
it's not.
Where we start at t
1
equals 1, the
and
x
0,
y,
1, 2. That makes it congruent.
That is your initial point, your starting point.
And, I would use this parallel system, but it wouldn't hold up water into the next system.
Where you're actually stopping. The direction goes from 1 to 5. You can actually follow
I've called
that
it direct physics is usually what I call it.
And
that's a parametric equation to planes and curves.
That's a better way of describing the plane curve because it gives us our start, it gives us our stop, and it gives us our direction. That's the idea. Show of hands if it's making a little more sense. I promise it will after we do an actual example.
I started in two-phase because it's a little easier on the frontal lobe because all this is already done and I had better things to do than compete with mathematicians.
That's called your parameter. Hence we get a parameter.